Hey guys, welcome to another Friday video. Today it's all about Ryzen and building a budget gaming PC from parts that are purchased from AliExpress. So in this video we will look at all the components, we will talk about prices, but I will also briefly discuss alternatives. For example, you can go with a Ryzen 1400, which is very good value, but for a little bit more you can get the 1600, which might be better value for your situation. And yeah, we have the usual benchmarks and some games, and then at the end of the video we will talk about the value. So let's start with the main board. And as always guys, if you live next to Micro Center or MSY in Australia, then buying such parts from AliExpress might not necessarily make sense, but I've got a global audience and people from markets where buying new is not that straightforward. And here you can approach AliExpress sellers, get the price marked down and save with import duties and taxes. And of course, for me, this is all a little bit of fun and interesting. And yeah, so let's have a look. So this is the main board. It's from Soyo and it's got the A320 chipset. So the motherboard is quite basic. On the website, it does mention 65 watt CPU support. So that's as high as I would go. So we have two RAM slots, PCI Express 16 and two 1X slots. There is no M.2 on this main board. On the back, we have a PS2 port. There are 4 USB 2, 2 USB 3. There's a VGA and HDMI, which you can use with an APU. We have gigabit Ethernet and also audio output. Let's have a look at all the headers. Front panel audio, serial port. We've got a fan connector here, 2 USB 2, USB 3. There's also a jumper to clear the BIOS. We have 4 SATA 3 ports, and here goes the front panel connector. The BIOS is actually half decent. They're definitely putting in an effort, and we have a lot of options, including fan support, and there is also RAM overclocking. So you can manually dial in the RAM speed as well as the timings, and also increase the voltage to 1.35 volts. We will look at RAM overclocking a little bit later. There is an option to raise the CPU multiplier, but this does not have any effect as you can't overclock on the A320 chipset. In general, my recommendation is to pay a little bit more and get a B450 motherboard. You can overclock and you usually get more features. It's really only if your budget is really tight, then consider an A320 motherboard. And you can get a B450 motherboard from AliExpress for $80 US, but again, depending on where you live, it might actually be better value buying something locally. So the processor that we're going to work with today is the Ryzen 1400, 4 cores, 8 threads, and has an all-core turbo speed of 3.2 gigahertz. You can get it for only $44 US from AliExpress, so that's a really good price. If you have a higher budget, I really like the Ryzen 1600. That one has 6 cores and 12 threads, so it's a little bit more capable for future games and games that can take advantage of multiple threads. It is more expensive though. You're looking at around $87 US, so it's definitely not as good value as the 1400. I also bought some RAM from AliExpress. These one are branded King Spec. I'm not sure if I got the lowest RAM prices, but let's have a closer look. Here we have a 8GB dual channel DDR4 memory kit. Costs $34 US, rated at 2.4 gigahertz with CL17. It does overclock. I overclocked it to 2667 with CL18, just because that's the rated frequency of the RAM controller inside the first generation Ryzen processors. And again, if you have a higher budget, I recommend you go with 16 gigabytes. On these budget motherboards, you only get 2 RAM slots. So this one I bought for $64 US, and again, it's rated at 2400 megahertz and overclocked just fine to 2667 with CL18. And of course you need a video card. So this is where you should be spending most of your money. For example, upgrading from 8 to 16 or going from the Ryzen 1400 to 1600. Yep, you will see higher performance in benchmarks. but upgrading from a video card to one generation newer or higher model, you will see a massive performance boost. So what do I recommend? Well, there are lots of options. We are going to stick with AMD for this build, so we're going to go with a Radeon, and I believe the best value is still with the RX video cards. So a 470, 480 or a 570 or 580 are the way to go. This is an interesting video card. It's the Radeon RX 470D, which is a Chinese unique model or configuration, and it unlocked, so I flashed the BIOS into a proper 470. So that's the sort of card I would recommend. But like I said, if you have a bit higher budget, get a higher model and put as much money as you can into the video card. It will make the biggest difference by far. In terms of pricing, you should be able to get a RX 470 for around $100 from AliExpress, but buying graphics cards is likely the most sketchy part you can buy from AliExpress. You're not quite sure what you're going to get. They're definitely used and they might be extremely dirty with lots of dirt in the fans, and you have to spend a bit of time cleaning. So do have a look if you can find anything locally. But having said that, I have bought quite a few video cards from AliExpress, and so far I don't believe I have had any issues, apart from one video card that was extremely dirty, and I got a small discount because of that. There is an alternative that might be interesting. This is a video card that I haven't used in a project just yet. I only quickly tested it and it does work. So this is a Radeon R9 380 from Sapphire and has 4 GB of VRAM. It does require two 6-pin power connectors, but in the brief games that I've tested it, the noise and the temperatures were actually pretty decent. So you're looking at $80, and yep, that's a saving of around $20. And if you're on a budget, maybe this is something that interests you. And the rest of the system, we're using a Kingspec 1TB SSD. Even on a budget, I do not recommend using a mechanical hard drive these days. A SSD makes just such a big difference with loading times and responsiveness. We're using a 650 watt power supply from Deepcool, and yep, an update on the graphite thermal pad. They have been working, really well for me. I must have done 20 or 30 CPU cooler installations already, and works really well for what I do. I have the larger pad now, that's 40 by 40 millimeter, and they work better with the Ryzen processors. They're a little bit larger. So I will keep updating you in future videos, but so far this has been a really good investment to the channel. It saves me a ton of time. So let's have a look at some benchmarks. Cinebench R20, we're getting 1576. We also have Firestrike, the 3D Mark, so we're getting an overall score of 10,419. Graphics score of 12,907 and a physics score of 10,610. I also measured power consumption. Running Cinebench, the entire system consumed only 86 watts, and idle sitting on the desktop only 44 watts. And now we're going to have a look at some gameplay, because this time we're evaluating an entire system. We're going to test the games at 1080p with details set to high if there's a preset, or roughly high if you have to manually dial in the settings. As always, some of these games are the demo versions, and in many of the games I'm only showing the beginning parts of the game, so in later levels the performance might be quite a bit different. So let's start with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, 1080p, high details, and we're getting around 60 FPS in this area of the demo. This is a slightly more demanding area. It does get a lot smoother later on, but I believe the performance is definitely pretty solid. Strange Brigade is a game that runs really well on Radeon video cards. It uses the Vulkan API. Again, 1080p with high details, and we're getting well over 60 FPS at all times. So this is a game that's extremely playable on this budget machine, and hopefully more game development studios will use the Vulkan API, and such games will run really well. The next game is Project Cars 2. This is also the demo version, and here there's no preset, so I set most of the details manually to high, and it runs really well, over 60 FPS. There are a couple of different tracks that you can choose in the demo. The most demanding one is the one that has rain. There's a weather simulation running in the background, and that is more demanding. So yeah, racing games, at least Project Cars 2 runs really well on this PC. But does it run Crysis? In 2019, this is still a very demanding game, and it still struggles. It's really unoptimized. It needs a very high clock speed to constantly hit 60 FPS, and this part of the demo is a really good test. Before that, you're getting 60 FPS, but in this area, it gets a lot more demanding. So, yep, it does run Crysis, but once again, not at 60 FPS. Far Cry 5 is a game that prefers a high clock speed, or IPC, and unfortunately, because we can't overclock, we are held back by a 3.2 gigahertz clock speed. So unfortunately, that means it doesn't hit 60 FPS in many aspects. It is still fairly playable, but yeah, on a B450 motherboard, we could overclock the processor to 3.7, 3.8 gigahertz, and very likely it would then become 60 FPS playable. I then tested Apex Legends, and here I maxed out all the details, and look at that, 1080p, maximum details. It runs over 60 FPS, so that's a very nice outcome. And the last game we're looking at is Metro Exodus. This is with ultra details, but I've disabled the physics and the tessellation. Apparently this doesn't run too well on the Radeon cards. And yeah, gorgeous looking game. I keep playing a little bit each time I do a new video. It will probably take me still ages to finish this game, if at all. But yeah, absolutely gorgeous game, and I like the story so far. It runs okay, but there are some moments where the performance goes down a little bit. But all in all, I would say this is definitely playable, and you can still tweak around with the details. For example, dialing it down from ultra to high. So guys, I really like the performance I'm seeing. So if for whatever reason you want to buy from AliExpress, you can now buy parts and put together a first generation Ryzen system. That is a very good budget gaming PC. But you also have a ton of options. You can go with 16 gig instead of 8. You can go with a 6-core processor instead of the Ryzen 1400. You can get a B450 motherboard for overclocking and more features. And of course, you can get a much faster graphics card. So there is something there for everyone. In most games, we were able to run at 1080p with high details, and that's a terrific outcome. The main weakness is really the clock speed. So because we're using an A320 motherboard, we cannot overclock our Ryzen 1400 CPU, and therefore the all-core turbo speed is only 3.2 gigahertz. And in many games, this isn't an issue, but in some games like Far Cry 5, and of course, good old Crysis, this is an issue indeed. But yeah, hope dies last, and I'm definitely hoping that future games will start to use more cores and threads and not demand such a high clock speed in order to hit 60 FPS. I was positively surprised by the RAM, or the lack of RAM. In past videos, even with projects using 775 or AM3 sockets, I would use and recommend 16 gigabytes of RAM. But the performance was fine, and the only main difference I noticed was the loading times. They were somewhat faster with only 8 gigabytes of RAM. Still, for future-proofing, I believe going with 16 is the way to go. But if you're on a budget, then you can still game with 8 gigs of RAM. Do note that my Windows installation is fairly optimized. There's nothing running in the background. It's basically a fresh installation. So just keeping a clean house will also make a difference. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think about a first generation Ryzen system and these parts from AliExpress. I think this is terrific. More options for us. We still have LGA 2011 with the Xeon processors. They are also good value, and there will definitely be more content around that in future videos. But I think this is a real alternative, and it is a more modern platform. And some of these parts are brand new, like the RAM and the mainboard, and that also matters to many of you. Buying the processor secondhand, very low risk. I don't think I've ever had a processor that was faulty or didn't work. The video card is the most sketchy part that you can buy from AliExpress. So this might be something you should be sourcing locally instead. But yeah, regardless, I think the value is terrific, and it's really good to see that you can, for very little money, put together a budget gaming PC and get decent performance. But like I said, love to hear what you think, and keep those comments coming. What sort of content do you want to see? I'll read every single comment, and I'll do my best to make it happen if it resonates with me. And yeah, just like we did in past videos. And that's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Share it with your friends, give it a like, and I shall see you soon with another one.